Elena of the Witch's Box, and I'm here with another episode of Witch BookTube, where we cover books on witchcraft and spirituality to help facilitate the deepening of your practice. Today we're going to be covering a book called The Sorcerer's Secret by Jason Miller, and you can see it's a really beautifully ornate design. This includes one of his personal magical symbols or sigils, which I thought was interesting since we've been talking about sigils on Instagram and on the website and on the March box. So this is the book, this is the spine, this is the back. I wanted to read really quickly his biography or about the author so that you had an idea where he was coming from before we get into the meat of the book, because this is a really meaty book. Jason Miller's interest in the occult was sparked by a series of psychic experiences he had when he was just 5 years old. He took up the practice of both high magic and hoodoo root working while still a teenager, learning how ceremonial and folk magic can work together and complement each other. He has been involved with a number of orders and groups over the years, always seeking the quintessence of the art. He has traveled to New Orleans to study hoodoo, Europe to study witchcraft and ceremonial magic, and Nepal to study tantra. Miller is an ordained priest in the Galatian Rite of the Old Catholic Church, a member of the Teutonic Aurarian Temple and the Sangreal Sodality, as well as an initiated tantrika in the Nyingma and Bon lineages of Tibet. He is the author of Protection and Reversal Magic, a Witch's Defense Manual, which actually comes really highly recommended, and I've got that on my to-be-read book list. And the Strategic Sorcery blog, which is something to check out. He is also a regular contributor to Baumet magazine. Miller lives with his wife on the New Jersey shore, where he practices and teaches magic professionally. So I wanted to read the biography, both because I want to get into the habit of giving you all an idea of who the writer is and what the writer's about, but also because it kind of segued into the introduction. This is not a Witchcraft 101 book at all. I would even go as far as to say that maybe it's a Witchcraft 301, 401, for those of you who are familiar with college and university class ranking, right? The higher you go, the more advanced the book is. So this is really a good book for an intermediate practitioner. If you're a beginner, this is what I have to say. This book is not coming from a very specific tradition. So it's important that we start talking about this, because I know that a good portion of my viewers and followers and subscribers are new to witchcraft. And it's important to make sure that you're aware that we all come from different traditions. We all come from different lineages. If you are a dabbler, if you're just coming to this, it may very well be that you don't know what tradition you're really following, because you're reading and gathering information from different sources to kind of cobble together what your beliefs are, what your cosmology is, how you practice and why you practice the way you do, right? And so a book like this, I would say that it's important to understand that this book is not coming from a specific traditional lens. He is pulling from a lot of ancient old lineages and new information. And so my recommendation before I even get into this is to understand that. That is really important. This isn't Wicca, this isn't Celtic, this isn't Druidic, this isn't hoodoo, this isn't root work. This is an amalgamation of how he has studied all these different lineages and brought down this very coalesced, I guess, interpretation of all of those skills. If you are someone who is, for let's say, Wiccan or Druidic, or you practice hoodoo, or you're a santero, you can still read books like this, but it's important to understand that you're keeping two tracks. Your tradition and your lineage is how you view magic. This book is just about magic, and that's an important distinction to make, because you can apply this and the tenets or the information in this book to all sorts of different traditions. It's not a tradition unto itself. Know that he will pull from traditions that may not necessarily be your own, but I think that you can adapt the information that he's giving you to fit your tradition. Okay, that's important to make note of. With that said, this book requires a lot of critical thinking, and I think that this is something important that we should all employ in every aspect of our lives, especially in this day and age, particularly when you are a modern day witch and you are looking to grow and looking for information, and there is so much content out there. I mean, it's coming at us daily, right? Each of these videos is about a new piece of content, or even an old piece of content, which I gotta say that I actually hate calling it content, but there's information in the form of books, in the form of articles, in the form of websites, with all sorts of information on magic, on spells, on traditions, on goddesses and gods, and meditation practices and divination, all these things. And it can be really overwhelming to kind of siphon down and coalesce that which is most applicable to you. I wanted to read a couple of things out of the book really quick for you so that you have an idea and a feel for the book. One of the first things he says to distinguish this book from others is that spell books are great. I own lots of them, but they only go so far. You can pick one up and do a spell for something, but without the power and awareness to implement it skillfully, your spell only has a slim chance of achieving the desired result. Even if your spell works, do you know how to manage the result and build upon it? There is more to success in sorcery than simply performing a ritual that you found in a book. So I want to leave that point there and then move on to something else that he says, because he doesn't like the word spells or spellcraft or magic. He likes the word sorcery or sorcerer, because for him, magic is magic. It stands alone outside of tradition, and it's also married to very practical living. If you look at the history of why magic has evolved over time, it's because people needed very practical solutions for things that were going on in their lives. They needed rain. They needed their crops to be fertile and flourish so that they can feed their families, so they can be prosperous. So he really makes a distinction that it's not a spell book, it's a sorcerer's book. And I don't know how I feel about the distinction. It's something that I want to chew on because I actually love the word sorcery, and it makes sense to me in the way that he's describing it. But it's interesting, and it's also indicative of what's going to happen when you read this book, because this book makes you ask yourself a lot of questions, like, do I want to call myself a sorcerer, or do I want to call myself a witch? There's a lot that can be unpacked there, particularly if you take it in the context of history and how people have been persecuted for being witches and sorcerers, right? It's meaty. He goes into practical, strategic applications for magic, for influencing people, which is something I want to talk about in a minute, for money, for health, for love, for success, for protection. For him, it is very important. He talks about the fact that, yes, do the magic, but if you're not aligning your personal life, day-to-day behavior to sit in sync with that intention for that magic, then you're not really casting a powerful spell. We have to align our intention for the spell with everything that we say, do, think, eat, decide in our day-to-day life in order to support that magical intention in the world, which, yes, absolutely, if anything I can impart on you is that we need to do things on the day-to-day that are in alignment with our intention for our magical work. Because if you are living a life, I don't even know, if you want, let's say, you want prosperity, you want a lot of money, but you have really crappy money habits, then you are at odds with the intention that you said and you think that you want by performing a money spell. Does that make sense? So he talks about strategizing your magical intention with the way you live your life. I think that this is really important. This is what probably makes this book so much better than any of the ones that I've read recently, in terms of giving you the nuts and bolts of energy and the nuts and bolts of really manifesting your magic in the world. It's not a beginner book, and I wonder whether or not a beginner should buy the book. I'll let you decide that. I think that it's important. However, the things that I would caution about this book is that he brings in, without really telling you why, and this is a problem I'm having with another book that I'm reading that I will be talking about next week, why he's using the invocations that he's using, why he's using the Greek root words that he's using for invocations and for deities. He's pulling from a lot of different cultures. And he speaks a little bit to appropriation and not appropriation, and you're going to have to read that and make a decision for yourself. But for me, if you're going to speak to or share an invocation to a specific deity, I think that it's really important that you talk about why and that you talk about the cultural context for those deities. And he doesn't do that here. So that's something to look out for. It may not be important to you. I think that it is important for me personally, because I think that understanding the context and the cultural context from which your spirituality pulls from is critical, because we can just be misappropriating all over the place and missing the deeper meaning of who that deity is in a larger cultural scope, right? So, and this is something that a lot of people are talking about in many, many spaces, which I think is great. Understand that he's not going to tell you why he's pulling from this deity the way he is. That said, you can absolutely replace the deities that you work with into these invocations, and they would still be just as powerful. There is a section here on ethics, because he talks a lot about, there's a whole chapter on influencing people and doing spells that will influence other people around you. And so this is like a big hot buzz button thing for everyone, right? Because we want to do things that are ethical. We don't want to impose our will on other people. But he posits the point that whatever you do is always going to influence people. There is no way to not influence people in the things that we do. When you go to a job interview, you dress in a certain way. Why? Because you want people to see you in a specific manner. That's influencing people, right? So it's interesting because, again, it makes you think about the things that you do. Why do you believe the things that you believe? And why are you doing one sort of magic but not the other? And he doesn't try to convince you one way or another, but I think that it's an important conversation to have with yourself as a practitioner, as a witch, because it's not enough, in my personal opinion, to follow rules just because they're out there and they sound pretty. Know why. Like, really understand internally for yourself why you follow certain tenets and why you don't. It's just about maturation. It's about our spiritual maturity. Know yourself, and know yourself very clearly outside of all of the noise and all of the choruses that we have outside of ourselves that sound cool and sound pretty and sound lovey, but there's no conscious connection to ourselves over that. Does that make sense? And I'm not advocating for one thing or the other. I'm advocating for us to know who we are and why we believe what we believe and why we've chosen a path that we've chosen. This book can make you uncomfortable because there are things that he says that for me were personally against how I like to practice and against my own personal moral code. But I don't think that that makes the book bad. It just means that when you read this book, you got to be clear, have your own personal foundation, have your own ground so that you can take from this what serves and you can leave what doesn't serve. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it is not a beginner book. It's something that I think people who have an established practice, an established cosmology could benefit from. If you're new, it might be confusing. If you're new, a lot of the ideas might go over your head. That's okay. You'd probably still gain something out of it. There is a portion of this book that dedicates itself to the breath and to meditation, which I think is fantastic. And I think that it absolutely has to be, I'm going to just give a bunch of absolutes here. It absolutely has to be at the foundation of any spiritual practice. Any. Because at the base of any spiritual practice, knowing yourself, creating space within yourself, creating presence for yourself is like the core. It's the core. It's the core to a better life. It's the core to being able to respond to life and not react to life. It's the core to self-awareness. I mean, these are important things. And so I love that. He had some excellent exercises for the breath and for meditation that I'm certainly going to start sharing with people because I thought they were fantastic. Some were familiar to me, some were not. They're simple and they're still really effective. The section in the back where he talks about money, I thought was really educational and very helpful for people who would have struggles with money energy. Also, the protection and security section was also very powerful. I loved the book, but I was very aware as I was reading it that I was parsing out a lot of information. Some was applicable to the way I see the world and some wasn't. I think that that is an important thing to keep in mind when you read the book. That said, it is a great book because it gives you a deeper insight into magic, into spells. The distinction between a spellcrafter or a magician or a witch and a sorcerer, that's interesting and it's something to think about, yes. The mechanics of strategizing around spells, I think, was really what is the most valuable in this book. And the books that are out there, the ones that give you spell after spell after spell, don't touch this at all. And I think that it does people a massive disservice because at this point we're getting into a place where we're just like handing around recipe books of spells with no context and no depth and no substance. This book will give that to you, which I really appreciate. Just know that, one, you need to know where you're coming from. You need to know what your tradition is, because this is an amalgamation of quite a few different traditions he's studied extensively. He's pulling from a lot of different traditions that may not make sense to you. So understand where you're coming from in order to take this book and get from it what you need and leave the rest. Not all of it is going to apply to you. Be ready to ask yourself some questions about ethics. He talks about it. He talks about responsibility, but he also gives you an entire chapter on influencing people, which can be an issue for some of us. The other thing I wanted to say, I highlighted this and I wanted to read it because this is a really great summary of what the book is for you to make a decision whether or not it's something that you want for yourself. And he says, as I said in the introduction, this book is a field guide for practical sorcery. Though there is certainly a lot of classical magic in the book, there is also a lot of information that isn't typically thought of as magic. I want my readers to stop thinking in terms of what is magic and what is not, and instead start thinking in terms of what is successful and what is not. The test of a sorcerer is whether they can achieve success in their endeavors, which requires both skill of magic and skill in any other areas that can impact the situation. Skill in magic and ineptitude at life will not yield real results, only fantasies of power and wisdom. And that can sound a little harsh, but I think that there's some practical wisdom in that. The book is called The Sorcerer's Secret: Strategies for Practical Magic. Jason Miller is the writer. $15.99 in the US. There's no price for Canadian, but again, as always, you can get it cheaper on Amazon. I always have a link to that below. I will recommend this book for people who are a little bit more advanced in their practice. I recommend this book for people who are able to critically think their way through a book that might challenge their ideas. I would also say that you can critically think your way through the book while also understanding that you're holding two tracks. You have a lens that is your tradition, that is your lineage, and you're able to put that aside to look at this book and then pull what applies to you and then apply it to your tradition or lineage. It's important that we know and understand the mechanics behind magic and the way that magic works. He doesn't cover all aspects of this, but he's well studied. He pulls in a lot of sources. It can be a really valuable book in your library. I recommend it, but with all of those caveats that I said in the video. This is a longer video than normal, but this book deserved some talking. It's meaty. Like, I did a lot of underlining. I forget that you guys want to see, but there was a lot of underlining. I did just personal questions and notes. There's a section here where I literally wrote a whole chapter in the margin. I couldn't stop. So that's it for today. Next week is next week. I have a book that I have been reading and putting down and reading and putting down for the last month and a half because I've had a really hard time with this book. And it has brought up for me a lot of questions about what do I want this series to be for all of you, right? Like, I love reading and I love talking about the books that I've read. And I also want these videos to be a facilitative tool for all of you so that you can make better decisions about the books that you want to buy to help support your spiritual practice and your path. This book has pushed so many buttons for me, oh my God. So I have questioned whether or not I need to actually share this book with you or not. But because it's actually a book that I sent out in the Witch's Box of December, I think that's important that I address it. So that's coming next week. We'll see how that goes because I do have a little bit of anxiety over how I'm going to address this book. Anyway, all that to say, it's been wonderful having this week. This book has been wonderful. It's been great sharing it with you. You all have been amazing in the comments and in the emails and the questions that you're asking, and I love it. Keep them coming. That's it. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you on all the social medias and on the website. Blessings.